So what do you do when one tragedy happens in your life and it's followed by another and then another and then another? Well, I think it's honest and completely human to look up and ask why. That's what I did. So I'm sitting at the bottom of our driveway, hoping this will work because Dave has our friend over, Mike, and they're pulling trees out of the woods so Dave can get firewood ready for the winter. But literally, this is at least the fifth time I've tried to do this, and every time I get interrupted by a chainsaw or, the tractor or something. So let's see if this will work. Okay, so a little backstory. When I was 26, Dave and I had been married 2 years. Just very suddenly, with no warning, my grandfather died. He was only 61. And he had been just this really important person in my life, the closest thing I had to a father, and a beautiful human being, just a wonderful man, kind to everyone, gentle, hard worker. And really, I think one of the things I loved the most about him was how good he was to my grandma and how much he loved her. She was, for a great deal of her life, toward the end, she was confined to a wheelchair with really severe rheumatoid arthritis. And Grandpa took the most gentle care of her. And she would look up from him and say, "Oh, Clifford, you're my protector and my provider," which I always thought was so beautiful. But when Grandpa died, that was just a devastating blow to all of us. And we just couldn't even believe it had happened. And then, though, within 4 months, we were dealt another blow when my mother died. She was 46. And we were told that she committed suicide, that she had shot herself. I couldn't believe it then, and I still have a hard time believing that's what happened. But that, of course, superseded everything else in my life. And I hadn't really even grieved for my grandpa that much, but I had, but it wasn't like I had, time to come to any sort of reconciliation with that. I was still in shock. But then there's my mom, and that took center stage in my life. Well, those were dark days. And then within about, I would say, 6 more months, we got a diagnosis that I was infertile, that I couldn't conceive. And being that I had always wanted 10 children, that was an enormous blow. I was still reeling from that when a few months after that, maybe it was closer to a year, my grandmother then died. And it was unexpected there too. So that was just very seriously the darkest days of my life. I wasn't even sure how to go on. I do remember lying on our bed in a fetal position when my mom died, thinking, how am I supposed to live 50 years without my mom? And then when my grandma died, she was my best friend. Her last words to me were, "You have been my very lovely friend," which still makes me cry to this day. Okay, a biker's coming along the trail. I don't want to scare him by talking to myself. Here's some silence. Hold on. Hi. That was so clever of me, don't you think? Anyway, so we did then, and I told part of this story in the video I did several weeks ago called "That Time That a Child I Never Met Interceded for Me." If you haven't heard that one, it's really a good story, and still just one of those times where I'm like, oh God, you're so real, and you've made yourself so real to me. But how that all began, though, was, we adopted Zachary through that story, and then everything was wonderful. I was still grieving all my losses, of course, but my life felt like it was coming together, and I had such joy being a mother that it really helped me to put all of that in the back burner a little bit. Every day was better than the last, and that boy just still makes me laugh constantly. I just remember so many times putting him to bed and saying, "I always wanted a boy just like you." One day he said it back to me. He goes, "Mom," "I always wanted a mom just like you." And that was sort of like the highlight of my life. But everything was fine until he started getting older and noticed that he didn't have any siblings, and a lot of his friends did. So he started really asking earnestly for a brother. He had no interest in a sister, but he wanted a brother. And honestly, I felt broken all over again by that. I felt like I failed him because I couldn't provide it. And it wasn't for lack of trying, because Dave and I tried for any and every baby that came along. We didn't care if it was a boy or a girl. We didn't care what the race was. We didn't care. We just wanted a baby. And in all, between Zach and our daughter Tara, we had 13 failed adoptions, which that was a blow all of its own. But I think it was about the fifth one that we were trying when a friend had connected us with this sweet 19-year-old girl up in Anacortes. And she was a Christian. Her boyfriend was not a believer, and she had big dreams of being a pilot. So having a baby didn't fit into that. And as our friend said, she does not want to be a mother. She doesn't want anything stopping her. Those were music. Those words were music to my ears, because I didn't want her to have any interest in being a mother. So we arranged to meet with her at a restaurant, and I liked her instantly. And she did tell us about the program she was trying to get into, and how much she'd always wanted to fly and all that. And then just in the middle of it, I couldn't help myself. I looked at her and I said, "Please promise me you're not going to hurt me." I said, "I've just had so much hurt, and I can't be hurt again. Please promise me that." And she said, "I promise you I'm not going to hurt you." So we waited for the baby to be born. It was a little boy, and the day that we found out he'd been born, her mother called to say that the baby had been born earlier that morning, but she didn't say the baby. She said a name that we'd never heard before, because it wasn't the name we had chosen for him. We wanted to name him Cameron. And that concerned me, and it also concerned me that it had been about 11 hours before she called and told us that he was here. And I knew that was all time that, the mom had had with him. But she said, "You can come up and see him tomorrow." So we did. The next day we drove up, and I did have a lot of concerns because of her naming him and spending time with him. But we got to the nursery, and everyone was treating us like the new parents. The nurse, we went into the nursery, and she said, "Here's your son," and put him in my arms. And the beautiful thing about that was there was a moment there, the second I really held him, where we locked eyes. And don't tell me. I mean, people have said to me, babies cannot see. That's just, they're lying to you. Because the same thing happened when I held Zachary the first time. I looked in his eyes, and on his side, it looked like, "Oh, there you are." And on my side, I'm sure he saw, "I've been waiting my whole life for you. But with this baby, it was the same. There was a lurch from my heart to his. I felt a connection. So we took pictures, and, we're just laughing and talking about, all the things we wanted to do when we got home. And the nurses were all happy with us. Well, then the phone rang in the corner of the nursery, and one of the nurses went to get it. There was nothing in her body language that told me what was happening, but I knew that I wasn't bringing this baby home. And sure enough, when she turned around, she said, "Give me the baby. His mother is coming to get him." Time seemed to slow. God was faithful and kind enough to me to slow time enough that I remember being able to kiss him quickly on his forehead and then say a fast prayer over him. And then she took him. And I felt the emptiness of my arms. I felt devastated, obviously. But we left the hospital. I don't remember leaving the hospital. I don't remember the drive to our friend's house. We went to see Dan and Suzanne because they had been caring for Zach while we were going up to get the baby. I didn't even have to tell Suzanne. She just saw my face. I'm sure she saw from that. And she gave me something that put me to sleep within about 10 minutes. I ended up sleeping on the bottom bunk of her daughter's bed. I don't remember waking up or driving home. I don't remember the next day. I just was in this fog of disbelief and grief. And I had been making a quilt for the baby. I'd made one for Zach when he was little, and it was beautiful. It was red and black, here we go again, flannel. And then there were red and black squares, and then was this fabric that was so cute. It had little barnyard animals, little pigs and baby goats and chickens and all that in this wild print. And so I had those, and then I had these red and black squares, and the back was all flannel, and there was this red and white kind of a candy cane binding. And so I wrote and asked the birth mother, or the mother, she is the mother, if I could finish making this quilt for the baby that I'd been making. And she wrote back and said, "Of course you can." And, it was funny because I wanted to send that quilt because I was so afraid he was lying in his crib, cold, and no one was noticing. I did. I was thinking crazy thoughts like that. I just thought he doesn't know where I am, and he's not warm, and I need for him to know I'm thinking of him. I was beginning to lose my mind. There's no doubt about that. So she had also written in there and said, I'm so sorry. I promised I wouldn't hurt you, and then I did. She said, but here's a gift card for $30 for Black Angus. And we did go. I didn't taste a bite of what we ate. I sort of felt like I was on, The Price is Right or one of those shows, and we had actually gotten what was behind door number 2. But I was praying the craziest things. I was praying, God, please make him cry all night. Just make him colicky. I mean, what a horrible thing to pray for a new mother. But I was saying, God, please, will you just help her to know that it's not as easy as she thinks it is, that it can be hard, and that it's going to change her life in a huge way. And of course, it would change her life in the most wonderful way, as babies do. But I was praying all those sorts of prayers. And so when I wrote back to her, she had said, don't worry, I'm still going to get my dream, because I found a daycare just down the street from my mom's. And oh, it was just, that devastated me in a whole other way, because daycare, I mean, there was never going to be 1 second where that baby was spent in a daycare, because Zach and I just wanted him to be home. I mean, he was our dream, and just having our family feel complete, So I couldn't imagine him being in a daycare when that would not be his life with us. So I did write back and ask her if she would please not put the baby in a daycare, but she didn't respond to that, understandably. But I would sit by the window and I would work on this quilt. I was, like I said, I was embroidering red barns all around on the black squares. So I would sit there and just work on that and think about him. And I would hold it really closely, just hoping that my scent would embed itself in the fabric, and that when it finally warmed him, he would smell my scent and know that I loved him and was thinking of him. I mean, isn't that a crazy thought? But that's where I was going. So I would sit by the window, and I remember one day when I really knew I was losing my mind, I was sitting there working on the embroidery of the red barn, and I thought, kind of in this dreamy, hazy way, I thought, when Cameron comes home, we should build a big red barn. And at that, I believe that my mind sort of woke me up, because what a thought, And I started crying hard. I just cried and cried. And then I had never asked God why when all the other things had happened to us. But this time I did. I said, why, God? And I looked out the window and I said, why did this happen to us? And why is it that these things never happen to our friends? None of the painful things we've gone through happen to anyone else. It seems to always be us. I said, why can I not have children? Why is my mother gone when all my friends have their mothers, and all my friends can have more children than they probably want? Why? So as I'm sitting there thinking these crazy thoughts and staring out at the window and asking God why, he took me across the yard and into that shed through one of the kind of haphazard boards that was hanging lopsided down. I could see the darkness in there, and we went into that opening, and it is just absolutely loaded with stuff. And even then, it was full of all Dave's tools, and I never went in there if I had any say in it. You can even step in there. But when I had this vision, as soon as we went into that shed, it was completely bare, except for one table in the middle of the room with a light bulb hanging down over it, a light. Here's some more people. 1 second. Hi. I'm never doing this again. But anyway, so I saw a table, I saw the light hanging over it, and then there was this old man with a beard, a silver beard, and he was bent over the table. I couldn't see him because I was behind him. But I also looked and I saw in the four corners of the room that there were these bundles of timber, like raw wood. Like if you went down to Home Depot and just bought some 2x4s and they were just rough, and they were all in the bundles tied with twine and leaning in the corners. And I could tell just by the condition of them, that they'd not been touched in a very long time because they were covered with dust and dirt and, spider webs. And then I returned my attention to the man, and I could tell that he was working on one of those pieces of wood. So I sort of looked over his shoulder and saw that he had a knife and he was carving chunks out of this board and smoothing it and sanding it. I mean, there was sawdust on the floor and, chunks of sawdust or chunks of wood and, little pieces of the carvings that he'd whittled away. And it was beautiful. I could tell from the beginning he had about this much done, and I could actually tell that he was carving a story because of all the intricate details, and I wanted to know the whole story. I wanted to stay there and watch him do the whole thing, but I just kept returning to all the little minute things he had cut into there. And as I was looking at that and just wanting to stay there forever and thinking that, my why reverberated in the shed. And when that sound came and I heard my question again, the man turned over his shoulder and looked at me, and I knew it was the Lord. I couldn't tell you what he looked like, but in answer to my question, he looked me right in the eyes and he said, "You are the wood in my hands." And I looked down again and could see that what he was doing was carving a story into my life. And then I looked one more time at the bundles of raw, untouched wood in the corners, and I thought, how much better to be in the hands of the master wood carver, even if it hurts, than to spend my life untouched in the corner. And I left that vision completely changed. I never again asked the Lord why, because what I had learned in there was that I may never know on this side of heaven why that particular thing happened, why God allowed it, but there is a reason and he knows it, and that's really all that matters. I learned in there a couple of other things, that the hard things that happen to us, the losses that we have, they serve to loosen our grip on this earth. I'll tell you right now that when my grandparents and my mother died, I did loosen my grip on earth, because now there were 3 people in heaven that I knew and loved, and I wanted to see them again. So earth lost quite a bit of its luster for me then. And the other thing is, when we go through those times of pruning or removal that we don't like those words, pruning, removal, cutting, chipping away. We don't like those thoughts, but they have to come because there are so many things in us that don't look like Jesus. And there are things in us that if we don't lose them, we'll be lesser of a person than we will if God takes them away, if that makes sense. And I remember just thinking to myself, I'm not going to question anymore when something comes, because it's just part of that story that God is carving into my life. I think that if we could look at our hard circumstances with that in mind, it would take so much of the sting away from it. We still aren't going to understand. And part of the thing that's so difficult for us is that if you're a believer and you know with all your heart that nothing happens to you that God did not allow, every circumstance has to come to us through God's hands. They're Father filtered before they reach us. So then we know he's part of it and has allowed it. Then, if you don't look at that correctly, you could think that God doesn't love you. But that's absolutely not the truth. He loves us so much, he doesn't leave us the way we are, because his goal is to make us look like Jesus. I'm reminded of that story of someone who asked Michelangelo, when looking at just the amazing statue of David that he sculpted, said, "How did you know how to make David?" And Michelangelo said, "I just cut away everything that wasn't David." And I really believe that those hard things that we're going through are helping to cut away the things in us that don't look like Jesus, or to help us to mold us into his character, because that is God's goal for us. He who began a good work in you shall carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. He's at work in us every day. So don't ever think that those things have happened to you without a purpose from God. In his time, we're going to know what the answer is to that question, why. We probably won't know most of it until we're in his presence. And I'm thinking by then it's not going to matter. But for now, our job is just to trust him and know that he is loving and good, patient, long-suffering, true, righteous, just, and that every single thing he does in his life is for good and not for evil. So I hope that encourages you. And I hope that you're encouraged by the epilogue to this story, because it was probably about 5 years ago when a friend told me, do you know that you have another inbox in your Facebook that's called Other? And I had no idea. I don't know if you even knew that. I think now we have Messenger, but back then it was, the regular inbox. And so I went and looked. Sure enough, there was this little tiny tab that I'd never seen or clicked on before, and it said Other. So I clicked on it. Of course, there was a lot of spammy junk in there, but then down the list, there was an email from this girl, and she had sent it 4 years earlier, and I had not seen it. So I immediately opened it, and what she said was, I just have to write to you and tell you how very sorry I am that I did not fulfill my promise and that I did hurt you. She said, I've thought about it probably every day since, and I can't get over it. I just hope that you'll forgive me. And I wrote back immediately and said, I would have answered you right away had I seen this, but I just saw it. I can only imagine what she thought in those 4 years. She probably thought I wanted nothing to do with her. But I said, don't worry about it, because God got me through it. He created so much beauty out of that. It was a chapter in my first book, and I've shared it all over the world, because all of us are in circumstances that have caused great pain, and we just have to trust that God was in it. And I said, so please don't think about it anymore. You're totally forgiven. There was nothing to forgive. You're his mother. She had told me that she did marry the boy's father, and they had another child. I think it was another boy, and that they had a wonderful life, and they were living in Arizona and happy. And I was so happy for her and delighted to hear that this child, who I still think of as Cameron, grew up to have a wonderful life. So when I responded to her and told her she didn't have anything more to worry about, she wrote back again and said, I'm so glad that 4 years went by before you wrote to me, because your timing couldn't have been better. She said, just this week, I met again with my pastor to go over this torment I felt, that I just needed to know that you forgave me because I'd hurt you so much. And she said, I think I can put this to rest now. Oh, I'm going to cry just thinking about that. But, to look at that and think that God healed my hurt and helped me to go on, but that through his amazing ways, he enabled me to be in touch with her so that she could have the rest and the peace that she needs. He's just such a good father. I know you know that, but I like to say it again and again. So I hope that helps you in some way. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.